This is americasdemocrats.org, the weekly netcast for stand-up Democrats. I'm your host, Jim Cuddy. On today's show, as we approach Father's Day, Mark Shriver pays tribute to his late dad, Sargent Shriver, who did as much as any elected official to improve America. Mark talks about his new book, titled A Good Man, which relates the lessons of family, faith, and friends imparted by his famous father. Author and political scientist Linda Killian has written extensively about the role of voters who call themselves independents. She says they'll play an even bigger role in the 2012 presidential race than in 2008, when they broke largely for President Obama. Bill Press talks with Texas Congressman Henry Cuellar, a Blue Dog Democrat, about immigration, the Latino vote, and tax policy. Also, if you missed it earlier, a special replay of our interview the day after the Wisconsin recall election with Peter Barca, the Democratic leader of the state assembly. Are you tired of Tea Party Republicans and Rush Limbaugh dominating the airwaves? Do you want the facts you won't get on Fox or even on CNN? Then stay tuned. Our sponsor, 21st Century Democrats, works hard to get everyday Democrats involved in returning our party to its roots and to success at the ballot box. Sit back and listen, then stand up and fight. And follow 21st Century Democrats on Facebook for all the latest progressive news. We're glad you can join us. Many Americans fondly remember the late R. Sargent Shriver, who founded the Peace Corps and accomplished so much else in improving the lot of people in this country and around the world. His son, Mark Shriver, writes in a new book for Father's Day about how faith and maintaining a balance in life are the important lessons his dad bequeathed. And joining us today on americasdemocrats.org, the weekly netcast for stand-up Democrats, Mark Shriver leads the U.S. program of the international group Save the Children. His career fighting for social justice and advocacy and service organizations, as well as elected office, has focused on advancing the right of every child in America to have a safe and vibrant childhood. He's just written a book called A Good Man, a biography of his revered father, R. Sargent Shriver. Mark Shriver, thanks so much for joining us today.
Thanks very much for having me. I'm honored and really excited. Thank you.
And we appreciate your time as well. You know, a lot of Americans may not know a whole lot about Sargent Shriver, or if they do, it was, as the first director of the Peace Corps or as a figure from Camelot. Beyond his various achievements in public life, the Peace Corps, Head Start, legal services, Special Olympics, what did he mean to you and your siblings?
Well, I think the book really tries to answer that question. When he died about 18 months ago, a lot of people did talk about his achievements on the international and domestic stage, as you mentioned, creator of the Peace Corps, creator of Head Start, legal services for the poor, Job Corps, foster grandparents, and his work with my mom and Special Olympics, taking that all around the world. A little less mention of his work in Chicago on interracial justice issues, working with Martin Luther King in the 50s. But I think what really made him a good man, and why I wrote the book and entitled it A Good Man, was the fact that he was happily married to the woman of his dreams for 56 years, my mom. He raised 5 kids, all of whom love him. He went to Mass on a daily basis. He had a daily intense relationship with God. He had countless friends. And he treated everybody from the President of the United States to the waitress at Reeves Restaurant in Washington, D.C., where he frequented, the same. And when at the wake, the waitress, 2 waitresses actually from Reeves waited in line for 40 minutes and just came up and said to me, "Your dad was a good man," and they turned around and walked out of the church. And I think it was the unique ability to treat everyone the same and to balance all these competing interests like faith and hope, family and friends and your work, that really made him a unique individual. And for me, as my wife Jeannie and I struggled with raising 3 children and dealing with aging parents, balancing faith and family and friends and work, I think my father has a few insights that I hope will help me and others to be better human beings. That's why I wrote the book. I think the book, I hope, will give insights into how to balance it all.
Was it his influence that led you to your present commitment to saving the children and fighting for the dispossessed?
Well, I think I've been at Save the Children for about almost 10 years now. Coming out of college, I started a program in Baltimore City that works with juvenile delinquent kids and did that for about 6 years before going into elected office as a state rep in Maryland. And then after that experience was over, I ran for Congress and lost in 2002. And then, coming to save the children. I think my father was a great role model, and my mother as well. And here were people that made contributions to folks not only in this country but around the world in different ways. My mother focused primarily on people with developmental disabilities. So I gravitated towards that work, but they never said you have to go into nonprofit work or into elected office. What they said is to do something that you care about, that'll make a difference, and then do it as hard as you can, to work as hard as you can. So yes, they were both, my mom and my dad, obviously big influences on my career choice.
We're speaking with Mark Shriver, who's just written a book called A Good Man, a biography of his father, Sargent Shriver. Mark, how has your family's and your individual faith informed your public and private works?
Well, my dad was raised in the Catholic Church, born in 1915. His grandfather was very good friends with the second cardinal here in America, Cardinal Gibbons of Baltimore. Cardinal Gibbons was his godfather. But they really were part of the Catholic Church that was very active in social justice issues, feeding the hungry, clothing the naked, working in soup kitchens in Baltimore. And then when the family moved up to New York City in the fall of '29, my grandfather to start a bank. Obviously, the timing could not have been worse. But even though the family declared bankruptcy a couple years later, and my father had to struggle to put himself through high school, and then through Yale and Yale Law School, all on scholarships and gifts from various people, they continued to do work in the social justice arena. My dad invited Dorothy Day up to Yale when he was an undergraduate there. So they were clearly attuned to the Catholic faith that believed in the call for feeding the hungry and clothing the naked. And that, I think, is consistent throughout his life, through his work in Chicago in the 50s after the war, working on interracial issues, integrating the Catholic schools and the Catholic hospitals in that great city. And I think, he really believed in a faith, relationship with the Spirit that was inclusive. And one of the shocking speeches I found that I'd never read was a speech he gave in '66, calling upon Jews and Protestants and Catholics, people of all denominations, to work together to go about doing our Father's business. And I think he believed that our Father's business was the work of the Spirit. So it wasn't a religion that divided people, that put you in a class or in a group, that you weren't welcome to all the benefits of humanity and to full citizenship. He believed in reaching out and including everyone in that effort.
Now, as an expert on what children need, do you agree with the more conservative elements of society that a two-parent family is ideal and that perhaps single motherhood should be discouraged?
I think what kids need, based on my own experience and what I've tried to do with my children, is unconditional love. I think, my father, and there's a couple of examples in the book that I wrote, A Good Man, when my brother Bobby got arrested for smoking marijuana in 1970, and this was after Uncle Bobby had died just a couple of months earlier, and there was, rumors that my father or my Uncle Teddy Kennedy was going to run for president in '72, and my dad was considering running for governor in Maryland. My brother was arrested with my cousin and a couple of other kids for smoking pot. It was on the front page of the paper. And Bobby told the story at my dad's eulogy and said, I got called into his room after he got off the airplane. It was a long walk, and I walked in there, and he said, sit down on the bed. And he said to me, look, you're a good kid. I love you. This is going to pass. We're going to take care of it, and don't worry about it. And that's all he said. And when I enrolled in the Peace Corps, and it was announced publicly at the 25th anniversary of the Peace Corps, and I dropped out a couple of weeks later because I got, frankly, scared about the process. When I went and talked to him, he didn't say, look, this is going to make me look bad. You've embarrassed the Shriver family name, which is what he could have said to me or to my brother Bobby when he got busted for marijuana. He said, look, I love you, and I want to support you. What do you want to do? And then he was awfully helpful in my career choices. So I think the most important thing for kids is unconditional love and forgiveness and support. And if they get that, they're going to do whatever they want to do in life because they've got the best foundation in the world.
And more than likely be successful because of it.
Absolutely, in whatever way they choose to define success, whether they want to be a lawyer or a doctor or a car mechanic or a waitress at a restaurant, it doesn't matter. As long as people know and kids know that they're loved and supported, they can do anything. I tell you, my dad slipped notes to me almost every day of my life. When I was in high school, he'd slip them under the door, and when I was in college, he'd mail letters. And when I was married, I'd get 1 or 2 letters every day. And I got a note which I just found in writing this book when I graduated from high school, and I had forgotten about it for 25 years. And it was on the day I graduated, and it said, not that if you work hard, your dreams will come true, because America is the land of opportunity. He wrote that he loved me, and my mom loved me, and my siblings and friends loved me, and that, God loved me, and that was the most important thing, that God's love and support was there unconditionally. And it must have been good for an 18-year-old kid to know about that love. And it felt really good as a 48-year-old father of 3 to know that my father still loves me, even though he's dead, and loved me when I was younger and loves me still. And I think if you have that foundation, kids can succeed.
We're speaking with Mark Shriver, and the book that Mark recently wrote, called A Good Man, is a biography of his father, our Sargent Shriver. You, of course, and so many other people who never even met him think of your father as an exceptional, almost a Renaissance man of public policy. Who did he look up to, and are there any others like him in recent or current American history?
It's a great question. They've all been great questions. That's a good one as well. His hero, the picture of the man that hung in his room was St. Thomas More. And I think he respected St. Thomas More and his commitment to faith, to the public good, but more importantly to faith, to a relationship with God. I think Dad was, Renaissance man is almost a trite phrase, but, here's a guy that when I'd sneak into the house a little later, violating curfew in high school or even college, the light would be on in his room, go in and say hi to him just to say hi, and he'd be propped up at bed at 1 o'clock or 2 o'clock in the morning reading. He would go to bed at maybe, 10:30 or 11, but he'd wake up at 1 and read for a couple hours, go to sleep for another hour or 2, get back up and read at 5, and then, be out of the house at 6:30 or 7 to go to Mass. Here was a guy, when you looked at around his bed, there'd be a book by Elie Wiesel, Bob Woodward, Henry Now, and Cardinal Lustiger. Then over there would be the Wall Street Journal and the New York Times, and over in the corner would be the Baltimore Orioles yearbook and the sports page. So when he sent letters out that could go cover the recent box score of a baseball game, to an article he had read in a religious journal, to an article on my mom that appeared in some newspaper in Asia. So he, was a voracious reader. Mine was fired up, and he was really a joyful guy. To have a drink at night. I wrote about this in the book. Have a vodka tonic with my buddies and tell stories, and then, take out the cigars after dinner and offer them to my friends and, tell them more stories. So he wasn't just a policy wonk. He loved life and was very joyful. And I hope some of the messages and lessons I've learned in really looking at my dad's life are helpful to people. And that's why I wrote the book, and why I hope it'll be a great, not only Father's Day present, but a great present for a lot of folks that are struggling, trying to balance family and friends and faith and commitment to a community and commitment to the world.
And I think it will be. Now, I have to ask you, what was life like as a child growing up as a member of a very prominent family? I mean, when did you know that the Shrivers and Kennedys were different from most families? And I mean that in a very respectful way.
No, I understand that. I understand it. I think, when my dad ran for vice president in 1972, I was 8. I just remember, a lot of Secret Service agents descending upon the house. He was George McGovern's 7th choice. And he always loved the number 7 because there were 7 members of the family, and he called us the Lucky 7. And ironically, after that 1972 campaign, he bought a little motorboat and called it the Lucky 7. And everybody thought it was funny because, the ticket had gone down to disaster, winning only Massachusetts and D.C. But as he liked to say, as he said to George McGovern after the election, we lost the race, but we didn't lose our souls. And obviously what happened with Agnew and Nixon proved them out a few years later. I think, that at an early age, you kind of get a sense that something's a little different. And then in Hyannisport, where we would spend our summers up in Massachusetts, when tourists would come by and want to take pictures of, us riding our bikes, it was a little, that's a little bit of a red flag for an 8 or 9 or 10-year-old. I think the thing that kept, me grounded was not only having great friends, but great family members, and a mother and father who, didn't care at all, frankly, about fame or any of the trappings of power. They were, they didn't talk about the past. they've focused on today, and the fact that they could do stuff again tomorrow to help people with developmental disabilities through Special Olympics or Best Buddies, which my mother and father helped my brother Anthony create, or that they could do something tomorrow for poor people here in this country or around the world. So when you have role models that don't really care about press clippings or newspapers or about whether people take pictures of them, it puts it all kind of in perspective and keeps you focused on what's important, which is your relationships with your family and your friends and with God.
Mark Shriver leads the U.S. program of the international group Save the Children, and his recently released book is called A Good Man, a biography of his father, R. Sargent Shriver. Mark, thank you so much for your time with us today on americasdemocrats.org, and we look forward to speaking with you again soon.
Thank you very much. Really appreciate it.
This is americasdemocrats.org, the weekly netcast for Stand Up Democrats. We want you to sit back and listen, but we need you to stand up and fight. Do you want to get involved and help get our party back to its roots and to success at the ballot box? You can make your contribution to Democrats for America's Future and help us keep this show going and to elect Democrats who will stand up for democratic principles. Go to americasdemocrats.org and click on Donate at the top of the page. This is americasdemocrats.org, the weekly netcast for Stand Up Democrats. Coming up in just a few minutes, author Linda Killian tells us what swing voters want out of their candidates and the role they'll play in the presidential contest. But right now, we turn to Jim Hightower, America's #1 populist, for his common sense commentary.
Scott Walker wins Wisconsin, screamed headlines across the country after the labor-bashing incumbent governor hung on to his job in the June 5th recall election. Well, yes, but no. Walker will get to stay in office for the rest of his term, but he did not win the election. Money did. This was a victory for the Citizens United edict issued 2 years ago by a 5-man corporatist majority on the Supreme Court. Their anti-democracy ruling opened the door for unlimited sums of corporate cash to barge into our national, state, and local elections and take charge. Walker is the first ugly sprouting of that alien seed. He sacked up some $30 million from corporate interests, nearly 8 times the money that his Democratic opponent had to spend, and 2/3 of Walker's stockpile came from out-of-state interests. Bob Perry, for example, an anti-labor, anti-government Texas tycoon, put more than $500,000 into his Wisconsin soulmate's campaign. Likewise, the far-out DeVos family from the Amway fortune gave $250,000, as did Las Vegas casino baron Sheldon Adelson. Then came the insidious, secretive, outside campaigns that the Supremes green-lighted, allowing corporations to dump mountains of their cash into elections. The multi-billionaire laissez-fairyland Koch brothers, for example, shoved at least $3 million behind Walker, practically all of which went to vituperously negative attacks on his opponent. This is Jim Hightower saying, so, some victory. Honest conservatives might take cheer that Walker still clings to the governor's chair, but there can be no joy in the fact that money rules. That's the lesson of this election, and that's the real fight. To join it, go to Public Citizens Grassroots Rebellion. Go to www.democracyisforpeople.org.
Need an antidote to the progressive blues? Want some good news about how grassroots folks are rebelling against the corporate powers and winning? Well, here's an easy-to-swallow pill for you, the Hightower Lowdown. Hightower's monthly newsletter will give you the lowdown, even as it lifts you up. It's 4 pages a month, jam-packed with facts you can use, actions you can take, and Jim's own Texas humor, all for only $15 a year. To become a lowdowner, go to hightowerlowdown.org.
This is americasdemocrats.org, the weekly netcast for Stand Up Democrats. Linda Killian, a journalist and senior scholar at the Wilson Center, has written a book about a powerful third force in American politics, the independent or swing voters. They may not make up their minds in the presidential race until it's almost over, but they will, she says, make all the difference. And joining us now on americasdemocrats.org, the weekly netcast for stand-up Democrats, Linda Killian is a Washington journalist and a senior scholar at the Woodrow Wilson Center. She is the author of The Swing Vote, The Untapped Power of Independence. Linda also writes about politics for The Atlantic, Politico, many other national publications and websites, and is the former senior editor of NPR's All Things Considered. Linda Killian, thanks so much for joining us again today on americasdemocrats.org.
Thanks for having me.
Well, always nice to speak with you. And, your studies of independent voters indicate that they're well-informed and very persuadable. What will it take to persuade them to vote one way or the other for president?
Well, I think the number one issue for independents, as it is for Republicans and Democrats this year, are the economy and jobs. I think what it will come down to is who they think is going to do a better job with the economy. I really think that is going to determine how the independents vote. And I don't think they'll make up their mind on that until late in the fall, until right before the election.
Is that fairly typical of independents, waiting to that last minute?
Yeah, because they are persuadable, as you said. Again, this is a bit of a myth about independents, that they lean for one party or the other, and they're not. There are definitely a core group of independents. I think it's close to 25% of the electorate who haven't made up their minds, who are true swing voters, who are persuadable. And they want to hear substantive discussions about what either candidate is going to do to move the country forward, to address our deficit, to work to improve the infrastructure in the country, to do positive things to move the country forward.
Why is it, you think, that people who were once, or perhaps never, Democrats or Republicans, identifying themselves as independents?
What I heard from, I did hundreds of interviews around the country with independent voters. I focused on 4 states that are incredibly important key swing states this time around: Colorado, Ohio, Virginia, and New Hampshire. There are some additional, those are the 4 I focused on. Obviously, North Carolina, Florida, also very important. What I heard from these voters is that some of them have always been independents. Some of them told me, look, I've been an independent voter my whole life. It's just the way I roll. Other voters said to me, I used to be a Republican. They turned me off with their conservative values agenda. Some of them did used to be Democrats. Admittedly, some of them say, look, I just, want to be called an independent. I don't want to get phone calls from, parties, stuff like that. But a lot of them said they, really don't identify completely with one party or the other, that they agree with the Democrats on a lot of social issues, but they agree with the Republicans more on fiscal and some national security issues. Now, one thing that's very interesting in this election, and that hasn't been talked about much, for years, the Republicans had the edge on national security. You saw it in the Kerry campaign. You saw it in what John McCain did. Of course, he was a war hero. People felt the Republicans had an edge in keeping the country safe and in sort of national security and in patriotism. These are the Reagan Democratic voters, cared a lot about that. Barack Obama has erased that edge. It's a big thing for the Democrats that with the killing of Osama bin Laden, that he has erased the edge that Republicans used to have on national security. And that's a big thing. And as a result, the voting group that I call America First Democrats, we used to call Reagan Democrats, I think are very much in play this time.
Generally speaking, where do independent voters fall in terms of some of the major issues of the day? The economy, the deficit, the environment, foreign policy, same-sex marriage.
Well, they, as a whole, independent voters are very diverse: age, race, sex, socioeconomic group. But the majority of independent voters, I think, are in the center. They are socially tolerant and fiscally conservative. So they feel the federal debt is an incredibly important issue to independent voters, third most important after the economy and jobs. So that's why Ross Perot got 19% of the vote in 1992. That 19%, 20% is sloshing around and looking for a home. They truly care about the deficit. They are less concerned about taxes. They think raising taxes is okay if it's done fairly. If we raise the capital gains tax, if taxes are raised on the very wealthy, if it's used for things like improving the infrastructure and education, they think it's okay. They want their tax dollars spent wisely. It's not that they necessarily want smaller government like Republicans, but they want government to be efficient. They are very socially tolerant. Things like gay marriage, abortion, birth control, they think these are personal choices. They don't think it's something government should be involved in. So they agreed with Barack Obama's announcement on gay marriage, but they also say it's not likely to influence their vote because they care about social issues far less than either Republicans or Democrats. They hate the money in politics. They hate the influence of special interests. 2/3 of them say they are independents because both parties care more about special interests than about average Americans. They disdain these super PACs, and they totally, want there to be something different about the way campaigns are financed. And they're very unhappy with the two-party system the way it is. They want more choices. They're environmentally more tolerant. They want more environmental rules than Republicans. They're lean more toward the Republicans on foreign policy issues. So their views are a mixture of both parties.
We're speaking with Linda Killian, Washington journalist, senior scholar at the Woodrow Wilson Center, author of the book The Swing Vote, The Untapped Power of Independence. You can check out Linda's website, lindajkillian.com, and follow her on Twitter, @LindaJKillian. Is it pretty clear that the presidential election will be decided by independent voters in the battleground states, or could old-fashioned, the get-out-the-vote drive still work for the two parties?
Well, obviously winning a presidential election, there's a lot of moving parts. And I think it's overly simplistic to point to just one. I think probably on some level it's more important for the Republicans to win the independent voters than the Democrats because there just are more Democrats than Republicans. And if Barack Obama gets out the youth vote the way he did in 2008, obviously the base, obviously minority voters, Hispanic voters clearly have a preference for Democrats at this moment in time. So he needs to get out the base. There's no doubt about that. But what tips the election are the independent voters. You couldn't win just with them. You have to get out your base, but you need them to push you over the top, especially in swing states like Ohio, incredibly important state, Virginia, a lot of electoral votes in those two states. And it's going to be very important to win these independent swing voters.
Do you think independents ought to be able to vote in party primaries?
I absolutely do. And this is where I diverge. A lot of partisans vehemently disagree with me. In Idaho and South Carolina, the Republican Party filed lawsuits to prevent independent voters from participating. A lot of Democrats think that, a lot of partisans on both sides think that opening up the primaries opens you up to, people from the other side voting and trying to muck things up, and that the proof in that, it's a little bit like voter fraud and all of these voter ID laws and stuff. It's a solution in search of a problem. Any sort of studies show that this kind of thing is very small. Partisans say, look, you want to vote in the Democratic primary, be a Democrat. Well, that's fine, but the thing is, when you have more people registered as being an independent than either Democrats or Republicans, that is bordering on disenfranchisement. And they pay for the elections with their tax dollars. If the parties wanted to be closed, they could have conventions and nominate their candidates that way. But if they're going to have a primary that's financed by tax dollars, I think it should be open to all voters. I think that would be truly democratic.
Now, do you think the rising number of independents presage a move toward a viable third party?
Well, unfortunately, I think the truth is at this moment, no. I think we saw the failure of Americans Elect, that independent group that had raised many millions of dollars to get on the ballot, but they couldn't attract a candidate. That was the bottom line. They just couldn't attract a viable candidate that would run on their ticket. Buddy Roemer, the former governor of Louisiana, had tried to be one of their candidates, thought about running as an independent. We do have a libertarian, former governor of New Mexico, Gary Johnson, who's mounting a little effort, but, I doubt he'll get 1% of the vote. So, look, the two parties have had a stranglehold on the electoral system almost from the beginning of the founding of the nation. The two existing political parties are more than 150 years old. The Democratic Party much older than the Republican Party. We will not have a third party overnight. And the two parties have done everything they can to try to prevent that, with closing primaries and with fundraising rules and with the way they have a stranglehold on congressional districts and the way they're drawn. So if we are going to have a fledgling independent movement, it has to come from the grassroots. It has to come from the ground up. It can't come from a bunch of millionaires sitting around saying, okay, here's what we're going to do to create a third party. And independent candidates will need to run for mayors of cities, will need to run for state legislature, will need to run for Congress. They'll have to build a movement. They can't, boom, right away run for president. That's just unrealistic. But I'm sort of agnostic about whether or not we need a third party. I think if that's what the people want, they should have it. If we had enough discontent, maybe the two parties would reform themselves. That's a big if, but, that is also, I think, a possibility.
Well, I mean, in essence, independents are a third party. They don't have representation necessarily because they're such a diverse group, but, I mean, that's essentially what it comes down to. I mean, ask Al Gore about a third party and what happened in 2000. Yeah. I mean, Ross Perot, you mentioned him earlier. I mean, we've had this time and time again, but I guess, as you say, it keeps getting quashed for one reason or another. Yep.
And I advocate a number of, the reforms that I talk about in the swing vote are pretty modest, but they're designed to empower voters. The thing about the swing vote and what I talk about is, and again, it's a reason why I think to some extent a lot of pundits have sort of dismissed it, because I'm not writing from an ideological perspective, really. I'm writing from the perspective of the voters. And what they want and what they think. And that is too often dismissed. And so the suggestions, the reforms that I propose are designed to empower voters. I talk about more transparency. We definitely need more transparency. In states that have ballot initiatives, I would encourage voters to push for election reform, things like open primaries. I think congressional districting should be reformed. They've done it in California, so that we have citizens. We take it out of the hands of the people who benefit from it and put it in the hands of citizen commissions, 1/3 Democrats, 1/3 Republicans, 1/3 independents, to design truly competitive districts. We'll see the result of this reform in California this fall with the elections and see how that works out. Obviously, campaign finance, the Citizens United decision, an enormous debacle. Some polling indicates that the Republicans and their super PACs and corporate interests might be able to spend $500 billion more than the Democrats in this election. It is an obscene amount of money, and the American people want it stopped. How we do it with the Supreme Court, I don't know. I think a constitutional amendment, which some people talk about, frankly, I don't think that's very realistic. But it may be the only way to do it. I encourage the public to give small contributions to candidates. And the Obama campaign is using this, has used it in 2008, is using it again, encouraging people to give small contributions. What I say is then you have some skin in the game. If you make small contributions to candidates you think share your views, are trying to work together, are trying to stop the dysfunction in Washington, then you will have an influence. 40% of the electorate, if they all gave $10, that would be a lot of money. And so I encourage them to get involved. Show up at public meetings, testify, call and write your officials, support candidates who offer solutions and are willing to work with all sides. It really is going to take, democracy is a participatory sport.
Very well said. Linda Killian, Washington journalist, senior scholar at the Woodrow Wilson Center, the author of the book, The Swing Vote, The Untapped Power of Independence. You can check out her website, lindajkillian.com. Also follow her on Twitter, @LindaJKillian. Linda, as always, great to have you with us today on americasdemocrats.org, and we look forward to speaking with you again soon.
Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. This is americasdemocrats.org, the weekly netcast for stand-up Democrats. We want you to sit back and listen, but we need you to stand up and fight. Help get our party back to its roots and to success at the ballot box. Make your contribution to Democrats for America's Future to keep this show on the air and help elect stand-up Democrats. Go to americasdemocrats.org and click on Donate at the top of the page. This is americasdemocrats.org, the weekly netcast for stand-up Democrats. And now, Bill Press talks about immigration issues, the Latino vote, and tax cuts with Congressman Henry Cuellar, a Blue Dog Democrat from Texas.
Morning, and we are very pleased and proud to welcome into the studio a new guest on the Full Court Press. Congressman Henry Cuellar represents the 28th District of Texas. Congressman, good to see you today. Thanks
Bill,
for stopping in.
it's a pleasure seeing you. Thank you.
See, we're so close to the Capitol. It's easy to just stop by on your way to work,
And
right?
I used to live just about half a block from here.
No, is that right?
Yes.
Okay, I'm going to move this microphone a little closer to you, Congressman, if you can.
All right.
Just make sure we get you full, loud, and clear there. Now, your district is, you said, the southeast part of Texas?
South part of San Antonio. Of Texas, from San Antonio to Laredo to the McAllen area. So it's one of those long districts in Texas.
Speaking of San Antonio, now I don't mean to rub it in, but San
Antonio won the game some years ago. I know they lost last night, but they were the champions some years ago.
Well, let's hear the final call last night. Here it is.
The mighty Spurs and the entire Western Conference have been thunderstruck, baby, in a transcendent performance for the ages. The Thunder have made history, becoming the 15th team to ever overcome an 0-2 deficit to win a best-of-7 series. Oklahoma City is the best in the West. 2012, the Western Conference champion Thunder will play for the NBA title in the NBA Finals, subduing San Antonio 4 victories to 2. The Game 6 final.
All right. So, Congress, you have to understand that we recruited Peter Ogburn from San Antonio.
I used to live in San Antonio.
I
used to work with the Spurs, for that matter.
And he was saying all last week and the earliest week, the Spurs, just watch, they won 20 games in a row. They're going to go right through the playoffs, right, and then beat the Heat. And what happened?
Well, I agree with them. Everything was going well. I saw when the Thunder beat the Dallas Mavericks, and I said, well, wait till they go up to the Spurs. The Spurs are going to win. The first two games were pretty good, but after that, unfortunately, San Antonio did well, and unfortunately they lost.
It was an exciting series. I will say it was a very exciting series.
Yeah, the first two games were very exciting.
Yeah, right, exactly. Yeah. Then they ran out of gas. I guess that was the question. So, Congressman, you're from Texas, a member of the Hispanic caucus, I guess,
Yes.
in the House. there's been a lot of disappointment on the part of the Latino community that there's been no action on immigration reform. Why not? I mean, at one time, even George Bush, when he was president, was saying, and he had a pretty good program, I thought.
Right, and you're right. I mean, President Bush did bring it up. He talked about doing it. And I remember at the very, very beginning, when he had just become president in 2001, him and President Fox talked about, having immigration reform.
That was his first trip. They went down there. They got together.
Exactly. Yeah. And then 9/11 happened. Things changed. Borders were closed to secure our borders a little bit more. Then after that, the realities of Congress just came in, and it was very hard to pass it, because if you look at the history, the only way you can pass something like this is through a bipartisan approach. In 1986, President Reagan and the Democratic Congress, controlled Congress, passed immigration reform. That really was the last time. This time, if you recall, I think it was around 2006, the Senate did pass a immigration reform. That's when Kennedy and McCain were working on it. Interesting, after in 2008, McCain just runs away from immigration totally, saying that the only thing he wanted to emphasize was just border control and nothing else.
Well, so the heart of it seems to be, the question is what to do about, pick a number, right? 5 million, 10 million, 12 million, or whatever, people who are here, who came here illegally, but have been here a long time, and they've got their families here, their kids are in school, they own homes, they have jobs, they're paying taxes. What is the answer?
Yeah, you're right.
Pat Buchanan says just send them all back to Mexico. Right?
No. That's like getting a good-sized American state and just putting everybody in the bus and just deporting. It's not going to happen. Look, immigration reform has to have three parts. One, border security. Most people will agree on border security. Two, you got to have some sort of a guest worker plan. Then some people start peeling off from that, but you still have good support on a guest worker plan.
Because we
can. We need it. First, give it to the American workers, but if they don't want to do it, somebody has to fill those areas. And then the third part, which is the more difficult part, emotional part, is what do we do about the 11 or 12 million undocumented aliens that we have here?
Yeah. And the answer is?
Well, I don't want to see a amnesty part of it. My father was born in Mexico. He came in, became a legal resident, and he followed the process. Long process, needs to be streamlined, but he followed the process. But I think what we need to do is get the people out of the shadows.
So he did not come here illegally, your father?
That is correct. He became a legal resident, then a naturalized citizen. But what we ought to do is, for those folks that are here without the right proper paperwork, we need to take them out of the shadows. They need to start learning English. They need to start paying taxes. We got to get them out of the shadow and start them in some process where they eventually become citizens. But don't do the amnesty right away. I just don't believe in amnesty.
Some path to citizenship, in other words,
that is
right?
correct.
That's not automatic.
That is correct.
You mentioned border security. If you hear some of the organizations and some of the Republicans, like the governor of Arizona, right? I mean, they think the borders are just as porous as they always were. What's the reality of the border?
Couple of things. And I live in Laredo, and I represent a large border part of the area. Yeah. And I brought my Republican friends over. They've stayed over at my house to show them. I said, look, is this the war zone that some folks on Fox News and other have come out and said this is a war zone? I live there. My family lives there. If you look at the FBI statistics, murder rates, assaults, and other statistics on crime. If you look at the border rate, according to the FBI, the crime rate on the border is lower than the national rate. If you pick Laredo, McAllen, El Paso, pick one of the border towns per 100,000, so they'd be even. You compare it to Washington, D.C., where we're at right now. Yeah. Washington has more murders than some of the border areas. Now, you go across the river, it's a different thing. Yeah. Over there, Mexico's having a very hard time with the narcos, and we got to help them.
In terms of the border itself and people coming across, are as many people coming here illegally as...
No, it's a lower amount. In fact, it's the lowest amount since 1972. The people trying to cross here illegally, it's the lowest number that we have. Different reasons, Bill. One, we got 18,500 Border Patrol down in the Southwest.
Which is more than we've ever had, right?
Whole history. That's correct. Second, our economy is still slowing down, so there's less jobs over here. Three, the demographics in Mexico and other places, if you look at the growth, it's smaller than what it used to be. So there's, the population growth is smaller. Then the other thing is the violence across the river on the other side, the narcos where they rape, they kidnap, and they hurt people. That slows the number of people trying to come over because they're afraid for their safety.
Yeah, they don't want to come to that part of Mexico because of they know what's happening. But we got to get that word out. I mean, the starting, I guess, with the Bush administration, but particularly the Obama administration. They really haven't done a good job about beefing up border security, Department of Homeland Security. I've talked to Janet Napolitano about this, but most Americans don't understand that.
Right. Since 1994, we've doubled the number of Border Patrol, 18,500. That's only Border Patrol. Doesn't include other officials. Doesn't include the technology that we added down there to the border. And what we got to keep in mind is look at some of the numbers. The Pew report, I don't know if you saw the recent Pew study came out. There's actually more Mexicans that went back than actually came in for the first time.
Yeah.
It was a very interesting report itself.
Congressman Henry Cuellar in studio with us. You can follow his good work in the Congress at Cuellar, CUELLAR.house.gov. Congressman, how important in this election do you believe, both at the state level and at the federal level, is going to be the Latino vote?
Extremely important. If you look at the number of the largest ethnic group growth that we've had is the Hispanic Latino population.
Just the latest survey we talked about.
It's just amazing. Even for example, in the state of Texas right now, when we look at redistricting, in the last 10 years we had 4.3 million individuals, new individuals in the state of Texas. 65% of them were Hispanics, Latinos.
Wow.
You add the other minorities, and it was 90% of the whole growth in the last 10 years in Texas. It was minorities, mainly 65% Hispanic. So there's a big growth of Hispanics growing. But the only thing is, I say this, if we don't register, we don't go out to vote, it really doesn't matter. And this is why the potential is great, but still, nevertheless, this big wave of growth in the Hispanic population is going to be very, very important for candidates locally, state, and federal.
President Obama has good standing among Latino voters?
Yes, he does. He's still up there in the high numbers. I know there's some folks that are a little disappointed because of the immigration, but if you have a choice, I think, without a doubt, Obama will be our choice.
Every 4 years, the Republicans make, when I was the Democratic State Chair of California, right, we called the Latino vote the sleeping giant. And we did a lot in terms of voter registration. I ran voter registration drives in East Los Angeles, for example, when I was working for Jerry Brown. But it was tough getting people to register until Pete Wilson put that initiative on the ballot. That would have stripped the rights away from a lot of Latinos, and then they said, "Hey, we got to get active," and suddenly they did. So every 4 years you hear the Republicans say, "We've got to reach out to the Latino community," and right now Mitt Romney's saying, "Maybe we'll put Marco Rubio on the ballot, and that'll get us the Latino vote." Will it?
Well, I think the Hispanic Latino community understands when it's a cosmetic dressing. I always say this, look what they're doing. When we try to bring up the DREAM Act, they said no. When we try to talk about immigration reform, they said, we're not ready for immigration reform because we got to secure the border. And they kept moving the goalpost over and over and over and over again. So I always, tell the Hispanic community, look at who's on your side and who's not on your side. And don't look at the cosmetic dressing where they come at the very end, talk to you a couple words in Spanish, or put a Hispanic candidate and say, we're on your side. Look at the actual work that they've done.
And Marco Rubio. What's your take on Mark?
Well, it's going to be interesting because, some folks are going to look at it and say, oh, he's Hispanic, and they're going to try to stick with him because he's Hispanic. I mean, no doubt about it, that's going to happen. But nevertheless, I think, the well-educated folks are going to look at what he stands for. Is he for or against the Hispanic community? I know he's trying to do a dream act. We haven't seen the details of his own, but he's trying to. But I know he's going uphill against the Republican establishment on that issue.
But you don't think automatically that he brings the Hispanic vote with him to Mitt Romney? They could automatically deliver that vote?
No. I just do not see that. There'll be some folks that will say, oh, there's a Hispanic run out there, but automatically is he going to get the majority of the votes? No.
When Congress is debating, I just wanted to play a quick clip. It was from John Boehner yesterday, right? Mm-hmm. The big issue is, what are we going to do about this deficit? What are we going to do about the debt? And what are we going to do about the debt ceiling? Here is Speaker Boehner yesterday.
It's really important that we provide some certainty to job creators in our country. And extending all of the current tax rates for at least a year is really important if we're going to help job creators gain a little more confidence and put Americans back to work.
So this is their new line. Mitch McConnell said the same thing yesterday, that the secret to this economy and the secret to creating new jobs is to extend the Bush tax cuts for one more year.
Well, keep in mind, and I've supported tax cuts. It's a blue dogs. But I'll say this, just to be fair on what reality is. The George Bush tax cuts, they came in, 2001, 2003. They were all there. They were in place when the recession hit us pretty hard, when we were losing 750,000 jobs a month. In December of 2008, we were losing 750,000 jobs. Under the Obama administration and some of the changes we've done, we've had job growth. The last 12, 13 months, we've had job growth. I know it has been the highest we can, but instead of a downward trend where we lost millions of jobs, at least we're moving up on this. So, the tax cuts might be some, but I think we need to be, we need to look at the overall picture. But just to say that the tax cuts are the only thing to look at, keep in mind they were in place in 2001 and 2003 when the recession hit us in 2006 and 7.
Would you vote to extend the Bush tax cuts for another year?
I will look at doing that, but what I want to do is look at the leverage. There's a leverage right now at the end of the year, a very special leverage. So we got to look at the sequestration. Well, we got to do some cuts, and then we got the George Bush tax cuts that are going to come in. Why don't we look at them together so we all give in a little bit in both parts?
All right. Congressman Henry Cuellar, I know you got to go. You got work, you got committee hearings or whatever today, so we appreciate your stopping by. On the way to work, on the way to the Capitol, Congressman Henry Cuellar represents the 28th District of Texas. Again, it's cuellar.house.gov, and you can catch up with all the issues that he's working on. Thanks so much, Congressman. Good to see you. Come back again.
Thank you so much.
All right.
Thank you.
We want you to sit back and listen, but we need you to stand up and fight. Join us, support the show, and help elect Democrats who will stand up for democratic principles with your contribution today. Go to americasdemocrats.org and click on Donate. This is americasdemocrats.org, the weekly netcast for Stand Up Democrats. And finally today, a special replay of our post-election day interview in Wisconsin with Democratic State Assembly Leader Peter Barca. The news wasn't all bad, he reports. And joining us today on americasdemocrats.org, the weekly netcast for Stand Up Democrats, Wisconsin Representative Peter Barca of Kenosha is the Democratic leader of the Wisconsin Assembly. Clearly a battleground state in November, Wisconsin just ended a tumultuous campaign seeking the recall of Republican Governor Scott Walker. Representative Barca talks with us now about the disappointing confirmation of the sitting governor. Representative Barca, first of all, thank you for joining us today on americasdemocrats.org.
Well, great to be with you.
What happened? How did the governor win re-election here?
Well, let me just start with the point that it was sort of a big loss, obviously, in the governor's race, but a big win in the state Senate. We took control of the state Senate last night. Over the course of the last year, there's been 2 sets of recalls. And in historic proportions, we won back 3 seats over 2 elections. starting in the deep minority with 14 state senators to a majority of 17 after last night's election. So as disappointed as we are in the governor's race, we at least feel very positive that we do now control the state Senate, and that'll provide checks and balances, as generally has been the case in Wisconsin.
Is it kind
but on to the governor's race, I think the reason why the governor was able to prevail is that the exit polling was very clear. You actually had 70% of the voters indicate that they just did not approve of a recall election. So, and I think there's something like 18% of the people who stated that they didn't even agree with the governor's policies, but they just wouldn't support a recall and cut short a governor's term. So I think that explains most of it. The other victor last night was Citizens United, because obviously, the governor was able to outspend us with his with the fundraising loophole significantly. So it was just a huge funding advantage that they brought into this election.
Yeah, and if I've got the numbers right, I mean, he was outspent by 12-1, and some 60% of the money that came in to the governor came from outside of the state.
Right, it was quite remarkable. I mean, he was collecting checks for $500,000, and every time you turned around, he was in a different state, from Texas to New York to California to Missouri to Illinois. Seemed like he was campaigning out of state even more than he's campaigning in state.
Yeah. Now, does it signal that Governor Walker is more popular among regular voters than perhaps Democrats thought?
Well, I mean, I guess we're still assessing the numbers, but if these people who indicated they disagree with the governor but didn't want to recall, if those numbers are accurate, which seem to be what came out of the exit polling, which was very accurate in predicting the outcome of the governor's race, then it seems as though if this had been a regular election, he almost certainly would not have prevailed.
Mm-hmm.
But in the recall, with cutting short a governor's term, people of Wisconsin just were not ready for that.
Now, a lot has been said, or was said before the election, about the National Democratic Party not doing enough on behalf of Mayor Barrett, the opponent here. Do you believe that to be true?
No, I think even Mayor Barrett was very pleased that the National Party worked hard to have President Clinton come into the state. We know President Clinton has a commanding presence, and there's nobody better at framing an issue than former President Clinton. And so we didn't feel let down at all. We understand the President of the United States has to worry about the entire nation and all the international issues as well. And we felt that, we had the support that we needed. And I think the Republicans are making a big issue out of this only because of the fact that they are so disappointed to see the president's numbers are still so strong in Wisconsin. And I just didn't, I also would end with noting that Governor Romney was not here for Governor Walker either.
Yeah. Now, Wisconsin's long had this reputation as that kind of a clean government, progressive state. Is that gone? Is it is it still there? Is this any indication of that having changed now?
Well, of course, it's painful for me to even hear you say that because I grew up in Wisconsin. I've lived here all my life, and that's one of the things that I've always revered about our state has been the values of the Badger State of quality education, a pristine environment, fairness for all people, but most of all, having clean, open, and transparent government. And that is at risk right now, make no mistake about it. Do citizens care less about that now? I would hope not. I would like to think that it just was the fact that they didn't want to engage in a recall of a governor in the middle of his term.
More the recall than anything else then. Yeah.
I'd like to believe that's the case.
Mm-hmm. Do you think this result indicates that Wisconsin may abandon President Obama come November?
Well, I mean, if the polls are any indication, quite to the contrary. President Obama has a commanding lead right now. That was found out to be the case in all the polling leading up to the election as well as in the exit polling. So actually, I think it's more the case that Governor Romney has a lot of ground to make up, and it probably is going to be unlikely he'll be able to do it before November.
We're speaking with Wisconsin Representative Peter Barca. He's the Democratic leader of the Wisconsin Assembly, talking, of course, about the recall the recall campaign of Governor Walker, which obviously went the other way, if you will. What's the next step for Democrats, Representative Barca, and others opposed to Walker's union busting and political extremism?
Well, our focus obviously will be on trying to move forward a Democratic agenda now that we have a Democratic Senate, for starters. And then secondly, our focus is on November. We want to win back the Assembly so that we have a majority in both houses in the legislature.
As Democratic leader of the Wisconsin Assembly, will Walker's victory kind of change how you'll work with your Republican colleagues?
Well, it's hard to tell, only because of the fact that the governor had committed publicly that he, if he were in fact retained in office, that he would operate more on a consensus basis. Now, that's been our tradition in Wisconsin. We normally roll up our sleeves in Wisconsin and, do the people's business and set aside ideology in order to get things done. That's what Democrats have been trying to do in this state for the last year and a half without much success. So, to some degree, the governor is, regardless of party, regardless of the time period, always sets the agenda and has most of the cards in terms of whether or not you're going to work together. So, we hope that that's the case. Obviously, we're a little skeptical because he said that before and never done it. But time will tell.
Yeah, I was going to say, where has that been the last 18 months, right? I mean,
Well, last fall, Senator Miller, who was the Democratic leader in the Senate, and I met with the governor at the governor's mansion, and he said that he was going to start working with us again. He said he'd put Democratic bills on the special session call on jobs, and he did do that, but of course none of them passed. So the question is, will he now actually not only talk about it, but actually do it? I'm the eternal optimist. I'd like to think that he'll recognize that people are tired of the polarization, and he'll do it, but, we'll see. Time will tell.
Mm-hmm. And finally, before we let you go, what lessons can be learned from this recall election?
Well, I would say that, first of all, it's very important when you're engaging in recalls, to try to measure public opinion in terms of being willing to support recalls. Now, obviously, we were so buoyed when we had 1 million people sign recall petitions. That's generally nearly enough to win an election. But unfortunately, in the final analysis, it wasn't supported broadly enough by people. But, of course, this was not a Democratic movement. This was a people's movement. We don't have 1 million registered Democrats in Wisconsin, so it was just citizens that cared deeply about their state, that were troubled by, not only what was done to working people and the quality of education here in Wisconsin, but also this issue of clean, open, and transparent government that led this effort. So we'll see how things progress.
Peter Barca is the Wisconsin representative, Democratic leader of the Wisconsin Assembly, joining us today on americasdemocrats.org. Representative Barca, thank you so much for your time with us today. Not a total loss this week, as you mentioned. You got back the Senate, and we move forward from here.
That's right. Thank you so much. Great being with you.
Thank you for your time as well. This is americasdemocrats.org, the weekly netcast for stand-up Democrats. That's all for americasdemocrats.org. Thank you to all who made today's show possible. Mark Shriver, Linda Killian, Peter Barca, and the entire Bill Press team. And thank you for listening. If you liked what you heard, please get involved in our efforts to keep this show going and to elect Democrats who are bringing the party back to its roots. Go to americasdemocrats.org and click on Donate at the top of the page. And be sure to find 21st Century Democrats on Facebook. For americasdemocrats.org, I'm your host, Jim Cuddy.